Hello, welcome to Cracking the Rich Code, the podcast. I'm your host, John Verico. And once again, I bring a very special guest. Our guest today is Kurt Welton, and he is in volume 18 of Cracking the Rich Code. And I'm going to tell you, this guy has got a broad spectrum of experiences, life experiences to share. He's an eclectic individual, Army veteran, musician, commercial asset manager, and a health advocate. I mean, this guy does everything. So let's have a chat. Let's bring in Kurt Welton. Kurt, how are you today?
Good. That's introduction is a little over the top, but I guess I'll take it.
I forgot to mention modest in all of that as well.
Oh,
So, Kurt, let me say first of all, thanks for being on the show, taking the time to do this, and let's get kind of right into it.
sure.
Tell us a little bit about well, first of all, you're in volume 18.
Yep.
Which is the one that should be coming out shortly if it's not already on the street as of the time of this recording. And you wrote a chapter that focuses on health. Let's kind of start off there a little bit as to what made you decide to write this chapter, maybe a little bit about your journey and how you got there.
Yeah. Well, I've had health issues my whole life. I think most people have, and it just seems like we want to treat symptoms instead of causes, and so we never really get to the roots of things and become super healthy. Then what happened was my first wife passed away from cancer. I sort of watched the whole process and studied it with her and my kids, and then I got married again, and my second wife got cancer, and I started to notice some things that I felt somebody needed to talk about. And with this MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again, it's all they're talking about is the physical health. And that's what everyone ever talks about. When you say, are you healthy? You think about your diet, your sleep routines, your exercise, nutritional subs, that kind of thing.
Waistline.
Yeah, whatever. And what you're missing is really the big picture. And for me, I think spiritual health is more important than any other kind of health. Physical health is certainly important, and that's very obvious and visible to the world. Spiritual health is more important because it deals with more of the world. But we also have emotional health and mental health. And because you're in Cracking the Rich Code, you got financial health. And so what we need to do is look at all of these ways of being healthy and know and understand that they're tied together. They're all in a matrix. And so if you're physically having some issues, maybe you need to look at your emotional issues. They may be causing a physical issue, or a mental issue may be causing a physical issue. A physical issue could be causing an emotional issue. So they're all interconnected. And so if you're struggling with any one of them, you could look at the others perhaps for some help. And that's one of the things I try to do, is tie it all together. And I bring up some new concepts that most people have probably never heard of, because I think I invented them. Maybe not. They might be out there somewhere. But one of them is called the cosmic Christ consciousness. And what this is basically at its core an electromagnetic field. We all have an electromagnetic field that is around us that can be measured now that we didn't know about 50 years ago. And so you've got these neuroscientists picking in the brain to see, where's your memory and where's your muscle movement and where's, that kind of thing in the brain. And they're in the hippocampus region, they found where they think is the memory. Well, guess what? It's just a card catalog. The memories are actually in your matrix, in this electromagnetic field around you, which means a couple things. One, you can have way more memory because it's not confined to a small biological area. But also, this electromagnetic field is connected to everyone else's and to the Earth's. And it's powerful. It's not some feeble force. Earth's electromagnetic field can, blow the roof off of a building and then set it on fire. You got to be careful. It's a very powerful force. And so we are all connected, which means when your biological bag is gone, your electromagnetic force is still around, at least parts of it, maybe not every bit of it. I don't know how all that works. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I do know that, we've talked about for centuries a soul. I think it fits in there somewhere, and there could be more discussion about this from theologians and scientists together.
Yeah.
But so the electromagnetic force is also part of what's called quantum entanglement. So, you could be on the other side of the world and your grandma dies and you feel it. So it's an occurrence outside of space and time.
Yeah.
So space and time become irrelevant, which also sounds like God, and the soul, eternity. All these things start to pop up when you start looking at what we've just discovered in terms of these fields that people have and how they're connected. And so that's what I write about, the interconnected, and a little bit about the fields themselves, and something I call spiritual gravity, which is the polarity of this field, and it flows. So the field flows, and its spiritual gravity goes from positive to negative. It's like a river, and it flows. And I'm not saying that it flowing downstream or flowing along with the river is bad. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying it's good. I'm saying there's a flow. So you have to understand that in your life and how you can use that flow. Can you dam it up here and control the floodwaters of your emotions so they don't spill over and destroy the crops or whatever you want to call the metaphor? Or are you just going to pollute upstream and they're going to get sick downstream and you don't care? And so how we deal with it. Chuck Swindoll, back in the 70s, 80s, he was a radio AM late night preacher. And Chuck Swindoll would say, life is only 10% what's happening to you, and 90% how you deal with it.
Yes, exactly.
That stuck with me.
Yeah.
How are you going to deal with this flow, this negative spiritual gravity flow? It's like physical gravity. It'll drag you down if you don't hold yourself up. How are you going to hold yourself up? What are you going to do about it? How are you going to help your spiritual health affect all your other health in a positive way? Because it can do it in a negative way if you don't do anything, because of spiritual gravity and the flow. So the flow, I think also, and I don't have this in my tract because after some discussions with some theologians, I decided to leave it alone for now. But there's this thing called original sin, and it's this tendency that we have towards doing what we shouldn't do. I think, is that part of the flow? The negative flow? I don't know. So there's a lot of things that we could look at in these ideas I have that could be picked apart and pulled open, and layers off the onion kind of thing to get to how they really connect. But I think what they show is that everything is much more connected than we ever thought. And actually, the people thousands of years ago got it pretty good, in terms of how they're describing what's happening. It's not a bunch of mumbo jumbo like we thought since the Enlightenment. That what we see in the ancient literature and the books on God has a lot of accuracy to it, and it could be very helpful in our lives.
And you mentioned a negative flow and how people kind of have a tendency to do things they shouldn't, but I think there's also I'm a believer that there's also a positive flow out there, and I think that given the chance, people will do good or prefer to do good and will help each other as a natural tendency as well. So there's kind of the combination. There's the people that are drawn to the negative flow and want to do things on a more selfish level.
Yeah.
And there are others that are more connected to the positive side of the flow. And for them to be benevolent and to do things with others is even more important. And I think this is a great way to look at life and society, and helps us to understand. Now, Kurt, you yourself have gone through and have had some significant health challenges And so that's kind of led you to a kind of this perception as well. So we want to talk a little bit about some of what you have dealt with in your life?
Well, without getting into too many details and just giving you the short little pamphlet form, I've broken just about every bone in my body. I've had hundreds of stitches.
Now, wait, before we talk about the broken bones, I just want,
Yep.
you also climbed a lot of mountains. You didn't fall off any of them, did you? Is that how you broke your bones?
No, it was, I hit a wall going 40 miles an hour on one ski. Shouldn't have been that close.
That might have been a mistake.
Going off a ski jump, with a ski that came loose halfway through the jump. So that, things like that. And so I've broken bones from a lot of sort of dumb reasons. But, that's why they call them accidents.
That's the stupid stuff we do in our news.
So,
right?
In addition to all that stuff, I also had going on since I was a teenager, a skin condition, and was treating it with topical steroids. That's the doctors who give me these creams and ointments and salves and all these things. And for 40 years, I was using these things, and my skin was just falling off. It was just like wet tissue paper, and bloody and everything. I know that on the night my wife died, I had no skin on my hands. And I was wearing gloves at the time. They would be bloody. I'd have to change them out 3-4 times a day. But now they don't get that bloody because I got skin. People look at my skin and they go, "Oh my gosh, it looks horrible." I'm like, "Yeah, but it's there. It wasn't there once. Wow. I didn't know if I would have skin, and now I have skin. It's not perfect yet, but it's getting there." And so the steroids pretty much destroyed my skin over 40 years, and then I met a woman who didn't believe in any pharmaceutical drugs. And so she got me off the steroids. And that's when my skin really, really was burned. It just, it was sort of like someone took a flame torch to you and burned you till you were crusty. And then you have to spend a few weeks, peeling the crust off to get down to some skin. And then it happens again and again. And this has been happening over a dozen times in the last few years. But every time it happens, it hurts a little less to get burned, and the skin's a little better condition when you peel it down when you get it peeled down. So but you're going in, there's times when it looks really bad, but it's, not as bad as it was.
Right.
And there's times it looks really good, but then all of a sudden a few weeks later, it's bad again. It's like my wife is having a hard time figuring it out. And I'm just like, "Honey, I'm getting better. I'm getting better." It just, it's like the stock market. It gets better, then it gets worse, then it gets better, that kind of thing,
So you got off of pharmaceuticals, and you're doing it with diet and other modifications in your life.
So the only thing I've touched my skin with is, and it's probably a little toothpaste around my mouth, was coconut oil for a while. And water. And then I used palm oil for a while. And now I'm using tallow. And the tallow seems to be the best. It's not a seed oil. And the coconut oil I started to get allergic to. I used it for so long. And it does darken your skin, I think. Now I'm actually 12.5% Chippewa. So I'm not red, but I'm not white. So you can just call me a pink man, I guess. I don't know. But I've got almost 30 different varieties. So I'm actually a mutt. But the biggest chunk of me is 12.5% Chippewa. And so I think that, might have something to do with the skin too. And so this has been what's been going on in my life the last few years, is trying to get this all figured out. And one of the things I realized was that when I did get a flare, it would be sometimes because of something I did. And that was my diet. And so then I found out about a guy named Dr. Osborne. Every Monday night at 6, you could pick Dr. Osborne's brain on his podcast. He's had it over 10 years. He's just amazingly smart doctor. And he did a lot of testing of me, 19 vials of blood and samples of everything else you could think of that you can give samples for. And figured out that I had mold in my blood, uranium, and I was gluten intolerant. So I've been changing my diet. No more noodles. And, my kids, it was a running joke. If I was ever stranded on a desert island, they would give me a box of Triscuits. I'd be happy. It's wheat and water and salt. That's it. It's like, I can't eat wheat. It's like, I know for birthdays, oftentimes I would get a box of Triscuits, and a jar of pickles,
And before we came on, you and I were chatting a little bit, and I learned something from you that I did not know. And a lot of the starch, like laundry starch, has gluten in it. And if you have a gluten sensitivity,
Yeah.
you likely will have a reaction to the starch. I know that happened to me with my military uniforms when I was in the Navy.
Oh, yeah.
Whenever I wore whenever I had starched uniforms,
Yeah.
my skin would react, and I would have all sorts of
I
breakouts
did
happen.
not have unstarched uniforms. I was this guy with breaking the new starch every morning that looked better than anyone. I was a company soldier of the battalion. My shoes were the shiniest. All that, my brass. Everyone else went out downtown and they'd party, and I'd be at home or on my bunk bed, polishing my shoes.
Polishing your shoes and ironing your uniform.
Well, no, it was really cheap. It was like $2-3 or something a week, and you could just give them a whole thing full of dirty clothes and come back all starched on hangers. It was
Oh, wow.
definitely worth it. I did not clean my own stuff. I just gave it to someone that came back nice. It was just great.
Hey, we're chatting with Kurt Welton. Kurt is, man, he's a pretty eclectic guy. He kind of across the spectrum. He's an Army veteran. He's a musician. We're going to talk a smidge about that here as well. He has a commercial asset management business, and he is a health advocate. And we've been talking about the health side of this for most of the first half of this. But let's chat a little bit. I want to also talk about how you climbed. Was it Kilimanjaro?
A couple times, yep.
A couple of
And
times.
other mountains, but I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro twice. Oh, you're wondering why?
Yes.
Well, one of the things I believe is you need to do is keep the saw sharp.
Yes.
And so I'm always going to things like seminars, they're an afternoon in a hotel lobby somewhere. And I drove to this one. It was a Dale Carnegie something or other. I don't remember why, but I went to it.
There's good stuff there. Yeah.
Always good. Always. I just want to learn one or two things. That's it. I don't need to learn all 46 ways to whatever, If I learn one or two things at each of these, I keep my saw sharp, and I'm always a little ahead of the curve from everyone else's rusty saws. I went to this Dale Carnegie thing. It was near Milwaukee, and right towards the end, they were like, "Is there anybody that ever did anything they were so proud of?" And some guy raised his hand. Huge guy, probably 300 some pounds, 6.5 feet tall, just huge guy. And he goes, "I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with my son." I'm thinking, holy cow. And all the way home, I thought of that. And when I walked in the door at home, my kids were all bouncing around and their daddy's home. I said, "Hey, who wants to go climb Mount Kilimanjaro with me?" And my oldest son goes, "I will." And nobody else wanted to. So I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, my oldest son, and it was a blast. We had a blast. So then my middle daughter goes, "Dad, can I do it?" And I'm like, "Sure." And then my youngest son wanted to do it, but he asked too late. I didn't have it set up, and then it just never happened. So, but then we said he wants to someday go through Bryce Canyon with me. So we'll do something like that. But
that's amazing.
So I climbed it twice, once with my 17-year-old son and once with my 21-year-old daughter. And just so you understand, my son, 17 years old, he got a full scholarship to an NCAA #1 school to be on their soccer team. He was on the state's championship soccer team, like 6 of the last 8 years he played soccer, and it was number 6th in the nation, their soccer team. Okay, so he's in good shape, right? And I said to him, I said, "James, I said, we're going to race to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, okay?" He goes, what do you mean? He goes, "It's a 9-day thing." I said, "Yeah, but at some point, you'll see the peak, and that's when the race starts, okay?" He goes, "Okay." So on the last little stretch to get to the peak, they get you up at like midnight. And by 7 a.m, you're up close to the peak, but the sun's coming up and you're starting to be able to see. Otherwise, you had these little headlamps on. And all the way through this journey, which 7 days at this point, there'd be beautiful pictures that you could take. And I'd say, hey, Kodak moment. And so he'd stop, turn around, and I'd get a picture of him, you know. So when I saw the peak that morning, I looked at, he was ahead of me quite a ways, and he had his head down. And I went, hey, Kodak moment. So he stopped, turned around. I took a picture of him with the peak behind him. And then I said, thanks, you know, and I put my camera away, and he turned around. He's just trudging along. And I started sprinting. And as I went by him, I said, I'll beat you to the top. And I sort of tapped him on the shoulder, and I kept running. So I beat him. By just a little bit, but I beat him. And there was a couple there getting their picture taken. They were just freaked out because we were like, what? Like, we're running, you know, running. And everyone else was like, you know, they can't breathe. You're 4 miles high. But we were both in pretty good shape, and it was a lot of fun. It was just a blast. Then I pulled out a cigar and lit it up.
That reminds me of my days in the Navy. I was a smoker then.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't a smoker.
I was a lousy runner.
Yeah, I was not a smoker, but I had an attorney that climbed Mount Kilimanjaro and said when he got to the top, he lit a cigarette. I said, well, I'm going to do you better. I'm going to buy a Cuban cigar.
There you go.
Nairobi or
I would do the Navy PT test, and I was a terrible runner. I'm a short guy. And I got short legs, and it takes me more steps to do that 1.5 miles than it does, you know, for these tall guys who run like gazelles. And I grew up in Brooklyn originally, and so running was invented to either catch something or get away from it. So, you know, running distance was not on my radar screen. And when they first said you got to run 1.5 miles, I was like, well, why? The ship isn't that long. But I would do the PT test, and then at the end I'm like, and I'd reach into my socks where I kept my pack of cigarettes, and I'd pull out these sweaty cigarettes and pull one out and take a couple of puffs on the cigarette, and I would go back to normal breathing. There's something really dramatically wrong with that, isn't there?
You know, I have a friend who's retired, lives up in Duluth, smokes a pack a day or so, and he's never going to quit because everyone that he saw quit, they quit and then they died.
And see, I quit 30 years ago.
He'll cough and cough and cough, but he'll just keep smoking. And he's my age, and it's like, I don't know. Everybody's different.
Yeah.
If I tried to,
yeah, I quit over 30 years ago. Actually, 35 years ago now.
Well, I've finished my story about my son and the cigar. I got up on the top. I lit up a cigar, pulled out a newspaper called the Catholic Herald because they had a little feature where have you been seen reading the Catholic Herald? So I got a picture of me reading it with my son on top of Mount Kilimanjaro and sent it to him, you know. And we were smoking the cigar.
And they publish it.
And then he threw up. So the cigar made him sick, and he threw up. I was fine. Yeah.
I love it. Hey, we've been speaking with Kurt Welton. Learn more about Kurt at kurtisdwelton.com and read his chapter in Cracking the Rich Code, Volume 18. That chapter, if I recall, is called Are You Healthy?
Are you 5 ways? 5 ways.
I love it. I love it. And so he's got a lot of great advice to share with you. We've had a great conversation. I can't believe we're almost out of time here, Kurt. So I would say, what would you want people to take away from the stories that you share in Cracking the Rich Code?
Yeah. By the way, just one quick little thing. We never got to me being a musician, and I want to just say I'm not a musician.
Oh, that's true.
If you put me in a room with 100 people, I could probably play guitar and sing better than most of them. But if you put me in a room full of 100 guitar players, I'm the worst, okay? There are really good guitar players out there, and I'm not one, but I can play a guitar, okay? But I guess the takeaway that I would have is that life is much more interconnected than we knew, and we're learning more every day. And what we are learning are things that you can't see, taste, touch, smell, or know anything about, except that we have these wild equipment now that we can see things that we couldn't see before. And so these ideas that the mystics had and that the ancient literature and in the Bible, it talks about the soul, and it talks about things that, the intellect and the will, and how they exist outside the time frame of the body. And so we see this now. We can start to measure it, and start to understand that we shouldn't just toss all the old knowledge. There's a lot of really good understanding that's in it, and it will help us connect the dots, because we got to connect everything for us to see the whole picture. We don't want to be like the blind men on the elephant. One says it's like a feather duster, and the other one says it's like a tree. They're touching different parts of it. That you need to see the whole thing to know how weird an elephant really is. So.
Yeah, sometimes we really need to see everybody else's perspective, put those together, and then we get the whole picture. But yeah, we tend to be laser focused in life, don't we?
Well, that's just it. We don't want to be in our own silo. We want to be able to look around and see where. Okay, so for 5 years I trained in being the deacon in the church, and they wanted you to learn your spiritual name. And my name is Spendos Kalosporos, which is sower of good seed. Okay, so it's not my job to chase the crows. It's not my job to clear the boulders or, to pull the weeds and all that. My job is to spread the good seed. And then I let God and the rain and other people take care of all the rest. Because that's not my job. You've got to learn. Okay, so I came out with a CD. It's called Life is a Dance. And one of the songs is called Life is a Dance. You know how that works. And there's a construction manual that comes with the CD, and there's 4 rules to life. One is life is a dance. Know what your dance is. Are you a laid-back West Coast swinger, or are you some kind of a upbeat tangoer, or are you a swinger, or are you a hustler, or what are you? What's your dance?
Or are you in the mosh pit?
Whatever, yeah, in the mosh pit. And so to learn your dance, and then the next line of the song is get out on the floor. So don't just sit there with knowing what you could do. Go do it. The next line, what are you waiting for? Because everybody's, I'm going to get there. No, tomorrow's too late and yesterday's over. Now is when you need to get out and do what you do. And the last line is, how can you ask for more? Do it with a good attitude, with a good mindset. If if you live in America, no complaints. I'm sorry, you just don't have any complaints that are valid. Okay, you can have excuses, and you could be a victim of whatever you want, but it's not valid. It's not. You're just so far ahead being here in the U.S. And if you're not in the U.S., you know what? If you have a good mindset, and you're like, we talked about that positive and the negative. There's certain people, they're positive people. They're like the salmon swimming upstream to spawn. You could be just lazing down the river and get caught in the swamps, or you could be going upstream. The coral, the great Australian coral reef, the coral on the wave side where the waves crash and pound, that's where it's growing. That's where it's getting big.
Yeah.
On the beach side where the water is dead and stagnant, that's where the coral dies. And that's what life is all about. Life is about being out there on the edge, feeling things and learning things and growing.
Constantly
You're either growing, you're dying.
I love
you
it.
Can't stand still.
This is sage advice from Kurt Welton. Kurt, people want to find out more about you. They can go to kurtisdwelton.com. I want to tell you folks, when you go to that site, it's going to lead you to multiple sites. He has a site for his asset management business. He has a site for his music. He has another site for a health business. Just lots of stuff. You definitely want to check this man out. He is not one-dimensional. I'll leave it there. Kurt, thank you so much for spending the time with us this morning. I really appreciated it. Learned a lot from you, and I know that the readers of Cracking the Rich Code will as well. Don't forget to check out his chapter in Cracking the Rich Code 18, and we will see you at the next